Um, Hello. Hello. Very excited to be here and to not be alone. I'm sorry, there's lots of people, I think, outside. The room is small, but we hope you can follow us also online and in the back room. As I said, I'm very happy to not be alone for this panel called Counter Cloud Strategies. And I'm here with three wonderful people that will give contributions and be part of the discussion amongst each other, but also with you. So first, on the left of me, in the green shirt, is Miriyam Aouragh. She's a comrade of the Institute for Technology in the Public Interest, an enterprise we run together with Helen Pritchard, also here, and Seda Gürses, not in this room, and associate member Gara Rocha, somewhere in this room as well. But most of the time, Miriyam works as an anthropologist, media scholar, trying to get her head around what is happening to grassroots digital resistance, how infrastructures, social media play a role in revolutions and counter-revolutions. And she does that work from London, sometimes Oxford, and sometimes Amsterdam. I'm very glad to have you here. Next to Miriyam is Maria Dada. Maria came from London as well. She practices continental philosophy. She works somewhere between design and visual culture. And her thinking, working, performing is around questions of what digital imaging does to social institutions and structures. I'm very glad to have you here. Thank you. And then, last but not least, Cristina Cochior came here from Rotterdam. Cristina is a wonderful researcher, designer, code practitioner. Her interest, both in practicing and in research, I would say, is to work around what makes collective life possible. And she does that through her technological practice, so thinking of infrastructures, thinking of feminist infrastructures, and at the same time thinking about the material and social conditions that make collective life possible. So this is a dream team. Of course, this team is not alone either. There's lots of people in the room that support this work and that you will easily be able to detect later on in this panel. So as I said, counter cloud strategies. Strategies may be a word we don't use so often, but today let's assume it and let's work with it. Before talking about what it means to resist the cloud, because that is what our panel is about today. Just a brief summary of how we actually, when we say cloud, what we actually mean, just to get a picture of the scale and the depth of what we think we need to resist. So when we say the cloud, we actually mean the big tech cloud, which is not only a global infrastructure of huge data centers, all interconnected. Interconnected not just between data centers, but also to what we call at TTPI pocket power, the way your phone's in your pocket, but actually any receiving device that makes something that moves into an addressable target for extraction. So besides the infrastructure, we also have obviously the financialized political economy of big tech. So besides that infrastructure, there's also the influence of the modes of big tech, the way that big tech makes money, the way that it is inscribed into like as publicly registered companies, having stakeholders, being committed to growth. And that means always pushing for more computation, never for less. So that's already two parts of the constellation. The third part that's not so often talked about, but I think, and we think with the Institute is very important, is also a shift in software production. A shift in the way that software technology is being made from, let's say, the shrink wrap area where you could download something and you would have something in your hands, you could burn it on a CD and have a sense of ownership, to software as a service, to software that is super dependent, interdependent, to use a word that I would in other political context actually would like to support. So super interdependent software that is flexible, that is agile, that is always updatable all the time, all the time. So these three things come together in the cloud. And not only that, because of course this constellation, this coming together relies on huge practices of extraction. Extraction of materials, of energy, of racialized labor, often confirming and following colonial fault lines. So when we say the big tech cloud, we mean this monster. We mean the combination of a particular economy, a particular way of producing software, a particular infrastructure, including mobile phones, depending on extractions elsewhere. So we think there is a reason to resist. And this panel is not just about what it means to resist the cloud, it's also somehow taking part of that, it's somehow part of that strategy. So we thought to use this platform, this moment, this in Transmediale, in being together here in this room, to call to strike. To call to strike, not just any strike, an international transfeminist digital depletion strike. It's a strike we are starting to organize with many. Can we see the slide, maybe? I see the slide, you don't see the slide. Right, never mind. There it is. A strike that we are organizing to somehow give ourselves the space to have a moment of thinking about what is actually happening to us. And if all is well, the next slide is not what I thought it was. But it's a strike that tries to somehow stick with abundance, go for different types of scales and mixing scales, trying to give us the space to think about how we could maybe do infrastructures otherwise. It's a strike that tries to not just think of this as like a only tech issue, because we understand that the things we strike against are actually interconnected. So this is as well a labor strike, a queer revolt, an anti-racist manifesto, a way to try to think together about how all these different struggles are connected. So that is what we would like to talk to you about, and we do that through this call. We do that through postcards and posters that you might have seen in the hallways. They have been published by Neon in Dundee. There's some people handing out postcards. There's also stickers circulating. So if you get your hands on one, you also have identified one of the agents of this strike. They're ready to talk about and ask you why you didn't already sign up. So how are we going to do this? So with these three beautiful people in this panel, we have prepared very different inputs of very different tone and very different level of analysis, because we know that this is not something that we can do in a coherent way, maybe. So we will have 3 contributions in with some conversation woven in between, and then we'll open the floor for discussion and conversation between us, but also with you. And because we wanted to try out different modes of doing resistance, we have been thinking about also what language we speak and how to work on different imaginations. And so we were very happy with the proposal by Maria to actually offer you a story in 2 parts. And she will kick off this panel by the first part of this story that she will read from her smartphone.
Wait, I better check this one. Can you hear me? Yeah. The small naked figure reclines on the Berwick sofa, a dead smartphone in their hands. They are easy to mistake, to be lumped with all the other delinquent figures working WeChat shifts on lonely nights. But their story is different, with longing, betrayal, lies, and disappointment woven into the fabric of their life. The algorithm confuses them with another figure. They always get their name wrong. Photographs of the housing estate where they live regularly appears in the police briefs and the charity reports, but you can barely see them, peering out of the 3rd floor window. The Instagram photo taken of them in the basement studio is the one that is most familiar, but their name is nowhere to be found. It is this lack of detail that prevents us from tracing their path through the streets of the city. The caption makes no mention of them, noting only the moral hazard of the 1-bedroom kitchenette full of electronic wiring, the foul condition of the toilet, and the noise of the server fans. They may never have known the meaning of the words abolish removal, or carbon compost pretenders, or cloud abolition, or desperation capitalism. But they were more than familiar with the seediness of the world of cloud computing, forming without intention various elastic solidarities that define their flavor of feral computing. They were always ready to print, to fight for their rights and those of their comrades. And in moments of vulnerability, it was not uncommon for them to seek solace in the words of a stranger online, a moment of tenderness in a cold and unforgiving world. They found a certain peace in the company of those who shared their wildness, their courage, their desire for something more than the status quo. They encountered a variety of online and offline lovers, from the kind and generous to the cruel and conniving. They explored the depths of their own desires and the secrets of others, and found in these encounters a kind of transcendence. They were never ashamed of their sexual encounters, for they found strength in meeting needs and in the power of vulnerability. They were not an advocate for counter-cloud action and infrastructure regeneration. They were not a clear advocate for counter-cloud action and infrastructure regeneration, for the inframutuality, not infraservitude, but they dreamt of writing recipes for the dark kitchens of the future. They followed the habits of keeping to the poetics, of interconnective intuition and institutional disobedience. They believed in the power of imagination, of taking care, not land, of the mission, not mission creep. They were a resilient spirit, abundantly operating with limits, almost infinitely scalable. The dark net alleys were their playground, and they had no qualm in joining the unsavory characters in their debauchery. They were a regular at the local cyber cafe, their body becoming more and more accustomed to the highs and lows of the night. When the sun rose, it brought with it a new sense of possibilities. They were not afraid to use their body, to get what they wanted, to take what they needed. They would trade their body for the infrastructures that they could not afford. They knew that it was the only way they could survive in the cloudless server slum. Sometimes they felt like a non-playable character or an extra in a play, going through the motions, but at the same time feeling like they were really living. Something about the forbidden thrill of it all was electric, like a revolution in the making. It was exhilarating. An inner world where people could be anyone they wanted, a world of resistance against the hostile environments of big tech, of insurrectionary algorithms and autonomous zones. Their presence was not always welcome, but they seemed to accept whatever came their way. They had a knack for setting up USB dead ports. Their body was their tool, their skin their armor, and their mind their weapon. They knew how to get what they wanted, to be seen and heard. They were a survivor of the server slums. Their nights were full of sex, coded messages, and heated debates. They were part of it all, and they would be remembered. It's difficult to know how to tell their story or what to call them. A proper name would only postpone the question, who are they? They are the figure we all know, a figure born in the shadows of the digital age, a figure who will never be fully seen nor heard. They are the figure that moves through computing air gaps, a ghostly figure that lives in the forgotten spaces of the internet. They are the rebel, the renegade, the one who finds solace in the wires and circuits of the machine. They are the figure who knows the truth of the system, the one who stands up to the powers of the day. They are the figure who will not be silenced, the one who will fight for a future. They are the figure who exists in the margins, the one who will never be fully experienced, but whose presence in the World Wide Web of resistance is felt. They are the figure who brings us hope.
Thank you, Miriyam. Can I ask you a question about the?
Yeah, sure.
Because you end with hope, and one of the stickers, or a few of the stickers, refer these slogans in the back are sort of brought together from different conversations, workshops, actions that we've been doing in the last month, year, and so some are.
Hope is weird. Hope is weird. Yeah.
Hope is weird,
Yeah.
or wicked even.
Yes. I mean, it is weird, but I guess this figure is weird and sometimes wicked. The figure of the story is not somebody. I didn't want to create somebody that was sort of clean and had, you know, perfect edges and wasn't problematic in a lot of ways, or made you a bit sort of threw you off kilter a little bit. And so maybe that's what hope does at the end. It kind of throws us a little bit. But yeah. It is weird, and I don't see that there's necessarily hope, which is why I had to go with fiction, actually, because fiction is the thing that allows you to escape, and yeah.
Right. Thank you. Yes, because if we say resistance, of course, then and we evoke the figure of the strike, attaching ourselves to the long tail of feminist strikes. So we step into a tradition and a mode of that is often binary, is very frontal, and it's clear that cloud resistance is in some way wicked or weird. And still needs to happen, I would say. So I would love to invite you, Cristina, to speak a bit about practicing other types of being with technology that are both abundant, but also about limits.
Yeah, maybe we can switch to the images.
Yeah, this is what I was.
This is working. Yes. Oh yeah, oh great one to start with. I wanted to, I selected a few photographs as a backdrop to the words that I'm about to say, because I am now standing as one person but belong to many different groups. Some of the people of these groups are in the room, so it's really lovely to see you all. And these images are from our common group chat that we host on our own server in the space of which I am part of, to give a bit of context. And to respond to the question of Femke, yeah, the counter cloud practices that I'm part of try to resist the pull of big tech through collectively cared for and self-hosted digital infrastructures, pocket power, that support collective forms of living. And these practices try to reconsider what it means to host and be hosted by a digital service, as well as try to reorganize the relations that usually take shape through the way a digital infrastructure is set up. They also revolve around establishing collaborations and networks of support and solidarity that reach across and connect different localities. And this is the image that broke the slideshow. And these practices try to build capacities to respond in situations of crisis, such as what happened during the pandemic, when big tech ended up being even more entrenched in our daily lives. And yesterday, Miriyam mentioned the term sneaky moments, and I think it's a really great term to hang on to during these, thinking about what counter-cloud action could be. So within the collective space that I'm part of, it's called Varia, we host several tools that allow us to organize and run a cultural space. And this implies collective document writing, doing accounting together, sending out invitations for people to join us, sending photographs to our group chats when we have a new book in the library, making publications, and so on. And these tasks seem quite mundane, but it isn't this mundanity that sometimes that informs how we exist as a cultural space. The way that we distribute the labor needed to run the space, the way we create the conditions for collective self-determination, where it is possible, and the way we create a sense of habitation together are directly influencing also the technical infrastructure that we use. For example, by extending, one conversation that we had was that we decided to extend server administration privileges to not just one group or one person, but to everyone who was taking care of the maintenance of the space where the server is hosted. So this mode of organizing socially is for us really important to reflect in the mode that we organize also technically. And we do this through codes of conduct, monthly meetings, decision-making protocols, learned from activist groups, mediation methods that we learn from queer and anti-racist groups. We share organizational skills with each other. We switch roles. We commit to a radical administrative approach. And we aim to have an equal agency and responsibility in the running of the space. So the point I'm trying to make is that the administrative, the maintenance, and the moderation work are just as important as the technical work, and they're all interwoven with each other. As a cultural organization, trying not to use big tech comes with certain constraints, but it also provides another abundance to operate within limits and to have more agency in the choices that we are able to make and the technologies that we use. This manifests, for example, in the decisions of which folders can be accessed and which not from the server, because everyone has access to the server, and so including our photographs are hosted on the server, so you also are able to access private information that in other situations or with other tools you would, like how you would relate to that would be dictated by the terms of service, right? But in this case, we have to negotiate this amongst ourselves. But that being said, we also cannot fully remove ourselves from the web of commercial tech or infrastructure. We are inevitably still intertwined with that. And to quote the Digital Solidarity Networks pad, which is a listing of different tools and practices on an Etherpad, a collective writing document, we cannot ignore that it takes effort and a great amount of privilege to walk away from these corporate tech solutions once and for all. We are all entangled with big tech, but we prefer to critique it, to put limits to it, and to eventually choose our own dependencies without being forced into them. So everyday technology, we think, can be a place of resistance, a resistance by reshuffling the importance of values. For example, by deprioritizing efficiency in favor of mutual learning, sharing knowledge with each other, or by refusing to do the work of seamlessness, or by reformulating technology along the axis of finitude, fictive charge, and a rehistoricization of power relations that they're built on. And I wanted to share a small snippet from a text that we wrote together. I'm quoting now. Focusing on everyday technology means questioning the hierarchies in place within technical objects, and therefore the valorization of skills needed to design or use these objects. Everyday technology means that a sewing machine is no less important than a laptop, that a tailor's work is by no means less meaningful than that of a computer scientist. Everyday technology means reconsidering the hegemony of high tech. Cheap artisanal solutions are our method of choice. Within our work, we try to show that low-tech solutions can be complex, inventive, and joyful. Everyday technology means to believe that not only experts should have access and decisive power in regards to how things should work. And then we... And to make a small bridge towards feminist servers, just want to say that this type of work does not happen in a vacuum. There are a lot of other organizations and groups that make this their work, such as Murat in Graz and Servos in Linz, or Vedetas in Sao Paulo, or Anarcha servers in Carafú, and so on. And we are embedded and we want to acknowledge that we are embedded in a larger network of networks. One project that made this its focus was Traversal Network of Feminist Servers, or also ATNOFs in short, which brought together 6 different groups, Varia in Rotterdam, Haifa in Bucharest, Lurk, an online service provider for various communities, ESK in Graz, the Feminist Hack Meetings in Athens, and Constant in Brussels, alongside Marloes de Valk and O. And the hope and aim of this project was to create a network of mutual infrastructural aid. And this took over a year. It consisted of a series of events. It was accompanied by a traveling server that was also accompanied by a traveling network of people who attended each other's events and tried to exchange different knowledges, from how to set up a server, to how to restart Etherpads, to how to move budgets around, how to gather a local community around these tools. And I think Rosa, this feminist server that traveled, became a space for rehearsing other ways of relating to technology. Like, for example, one thing that we did was simple gestures like changing the names of certain commands or messages, or changing something that is called the lecture file that you get when you use sudo rights. Anyway. But yeah, we found this important because this allowed us to shift the power relations between those who serve and those who are being served, and allow the construction of the user not just as a consumer but an active participant in the meaning-making process, to sort of move towards a smooth exit, not so smooth actually. We were asked by Marloes de Valk to come up with a term to describe the approach of Varia for the ADNOFs project, and we used this term called patchwork computing, with this idea in mind that no technology ever starts from scratch. And Rosa as well was compiled from different tools that were developed within the network of networks. And this approach of stitching together infrastructures to make and remake them according to local urgencies, to connect them even if only temporarily, brings to attention the possibilities for not only combining tools but also approaches across different scales. And grassroots infrastructures like feminist and community servers, they use this mode of address that is informed by the vernacular of those who serve and who are being served. And yesterday in the Sublime Depths panel, there was a discussion around the visibility of infrastructures as well, and how that has been mobilized as an aesthetic and political project by the states, and to promise liberal ideas of progress and innovation. And I think grassroots server communities do not really use this rhetoric of the server as a spectacle, even though they do make visible the labor that is involved in maintaining them, the resources that are necessary, as well as an imaginary around them. So they enable a mode of address that exits this dualism of either being functionally invisible or sublimely visible, And together they create a patchwork of infrastructures whose ad hocness supports and increments each other. Yeah, maybe I don't know how many minutes I was, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Many things you will come back in our conversation. I think, sorry, I need to use the microphone. Yeah. I'm excited about hearing you speak about all these different layers. You use patchwork. I'm wondering about your use of the word maintenance and how you make a boundary around what needs to be maintained and what might be deserted or abolished.
Well, we maintain our own server infrastructure, so that already puts some limits. And I will speak from that perspective, rather than engaging with the larger question, which I know you're pointing towards, which is also an important one, because I don't think all infrastructures need to be put back into circulation or repaired. But within this collective practice, deciding what needs to be maintained or what can be maintained also comes back to the capacities of whoever the maintainers are. So if there is no energy, no time, no financial support, sometimes if needed, that we accept those limitations as part of the process of running your own infrastructure. So sometimes it takes a bit longer to update. Sometimes someone gets sick, and actually this. I don't know if I should reveal this actually. And there was a group that was part of Transmedia that was using one of our pads last year, and at that time we didn't have a mailing list for the infrastructural work, and we started becoming these accidental hosters. So people started using our pads, and we were supposed to do an upgrade on that exact day when this pad would be displayed or used in the workshop. But one person who was part of that team got sick, so we had to postpone that day, and like we maintained this like appearance of smoothness because of this coincidence. We set up a mailing list afterwards. So yeah, if you're using our pads, please subscribe to our mailing list.
Yes. So this is maybe a way to move to Miriyam, because also something that came up in your description and rendering of the lively work at going on at Varia and in the Feminist Server Network. There's this idea of interconnected struggles, of connections between work that happens with the hands in the server, but maybe it's also connected to environmental action or anti-racist work, and also is deeply transnational. And I would like Miriyam, if you want, to give us some clues.
Is this on? Yep. Thank you. So nice to be together again. So I think this is a very important question, and it kind of follows up on yesterday's conversation I had of sitting here, and then I think a follow-up conversation we had with the group Impact in a separate room, which left me also a bit unsatisfied with the conclusions that we tend to draw and not draw, and leave unfinished sentences we leave unfinished. So I think the discussions that I want to connect to were the discussion about what is making legible, what is solidarities and resistance in relation to how you talk, what terminology you use, the discourse you employ, as supposedly radical, counter, whatever groups. And so what is your own contribution to making things more abstract, to actually not making legible? So that already is a very welcome observation, because it makes the solution very easy, because it brings a solution to yourself. you need to make more legible. You need to think about how you communicate, how you talk about tech, how you talk about the cloud in ways that are comprehensible for people that are not part of this very small, I think let's acknowledge this is a very elitist crowd. Like, we are not representing any like whatever broad interpretation of what society means. So I think that's very helpful. Like, it makes it also digestible and concrete. Like, how do we communicate and what do we do? And then the second question I think that came up a lot is also how do you do this with? So communities, grassroots approaches, collectives. And then sometimes there are these kind of like kind of request of providing a ready-made solution, as if you can provide a list of, so these are the most, I don't know what you call them in these days, oppressed or most needed communities. These are the phone numbers, and if you call them and you have a project and you align with them, you've ticked the box of I work with communities. That's of course not how it works. So we had a discussion also about trust, but unfortunately I think the discussion about trust focused too much on the state and seeing ourselves as partners of the states and how we can deal with our own trust or lack of trust, and much less about trust as in what about the communities and the collectives vis-a-vis us. I thought it was interesting how it went especially the other way, as if we are not part also of questions of like, yeah, so I think I had really interesting conversations with friends and comrades about, I don't know what the word was. Anyway, I used the word opportunism, but also there was this kind of like, when is it legitimate to steal, theft, to destroy? But it goes both ways. So there are also a lot of like communities or local collectives that are like, the next NGO that comes or asks, would you like to work with us? They're like, yeah, sure. And it's like, so what do you get, 150 euros? Okay, yeah, fine, I'll say whatever the fuck you want. And I'll get my share. And it's not necessarily genuine. But that's what we do as well. When we opportunistically deal with certain funders, with certain partners, we're also like, yeah, you want to know about, we do diversity, we do whatever. So this game is played both sides. And so even if you do have a couple of examples where you can say, we work with this, we work with that, that doesn't necessarily mean everything. It could be that they're also just saying, oh yeah, we work with this whatever white group called whatever, TTPI or Constant or whatever. They want to do some focus group, so we'll just go and talk about our experience with tech. So I think this awareness of that trust and genuine interaction goes both ways. It's not just for us, how do we deal with it? So I thought about like how, just analytically, what would be the kind of reference points that can help ground us in a kind of progressive politics, in a kind of radical epistemology that thinks outside the box. And so I thought about 3 entry points. Thinking outside the box is very necessary in terms of the question making things legible by thinking outside infrastructures. I think when we think technology infrastructures, we forget that discursively a concept or notion is always dialectical. It always includes the negation. So it's totally fine to think outside the box in terms of non-technological ways of communicating, non-technological ways of thinking infrastructures, thinking about infrastructures as we've seen in several amazing examples during the pandemic, where you had radical care collectives that were working on neighborhood basis that were not part of infrastructures. Also because the whole, at least in Britain, it was a complete shit show. This whole track and trace thing, I don't think it ever worked. I don't know. It was like a project that the buddies of Boris Johnson got, and this track and trace, like you would be identifying who needs. People were not going to wait for that nonsense, so they organized their own sort of radical care infrastructures, they were not technological. So thinking outside the box also of thinking in terms of the negation of something. So when you say technology, it includes the negation of technology. The second entry point would be thinking intersectionally, and then thinking intersectionally beyond diversity. So thinking intersectionally beyond the marketization of diversity, beyond the marketization of experiential knowledge, which has become kind of the new way of thinking about, you know, like anti-racist methods, that it's about your experience and what have you, which is, by the way, a code for not thinking about class. That's what it's about, right? It's a code, it's a kind of anti-class approach. So thinking intersectionally beyond the diversity industry, but thinking intersectionally as analysis, like intersectional analysis, the analytics of intersectionality that a South American feminist, black feminist, feminist in India, like the Global South in the 60s and 70s have developed, it's completely overshadowed by intersectionality as a kind of experiential, subjective accumulation of your identities. Intersectional, I'm this plus this plus this. That's kind of like taken over the other form of intersectional thinking, which was analytical. So intersectional analysis as in towards a kind of abolitionist analysis whereby you intersect your knowledge and analysis about the legal domain, the security and policing domain, and social class. I'm saying social class, that includes, that's an intersectional point anyway, that includes race, class, gender, ability, disability. So that's thinking intersectionally beyond diversity and towards abolitionist analytics is not a choice. You have to do it. Otherwise, I just don't think you can call yourself radical this or progressive that. It's not a matter of, well, I choose not to focus on the legal system, but only on the, well, that's why maybe you trust the state more than I do, because you don't see the legal side of the domain we're in, which impacts the whatever you want to do with tech. So this is not a choice. You can't have it both ways. You can't say, I'm doing radical praxis and progressive organizing, but then don't want to do intersectional analysis. You cannot do the liberal thing of removing class from all your analysis. So that's, I think if you want to do it, but then also be fine to be called out, but that's not progressive. And then it's fine. We can still be in the same space and talk, but you cannot claim then that label of progressive or radical. And the last one is think collectively. I think this came up several times. Think collectively. And this, I think, harks back to the conversations we had about solidarity. So I've been engaging in this discussion about solidarity, and it's not an easy discussion, because activism has become part of the marketplace of ideas. It has become part of very competitive dynamics. And so thinking collectively is actually a contradiction, because it would mean that you flatten the stakeholders, whereas thinking competitively allows a kind of like, you can compete for this funding for that oppressed group rather than. So it kind of is a negation, in my view, of solidarity, which I think always was about collectivity. So I think we need to talk about coalition politics. Coalition politics is an important tradition in struggles, but it's not the only tradition, and I think it has not become, it isn't as popular as it was. So coalition politics is about, in essence, I know this sounds very liberal, but I mean it technically, it's about, in essence, agreeing to disagree, where you have people from, for instance, oppressed migrant communities joining forces with like progressive tech, feminist tech, whatever, and then this and that. And so you don't have to agree 100% on everything. So coalition politics is also the most dangerous form of politics. It's the politics that has been the most, has been faced with the most horrible violence. If you think about the 60s, 70s, 80s, across the global south, but also the global north. If you think about, I mean, the coups in Latin America, but also the liquidation policies in the US of the Black Power movements, and across the world, those were often cases where coalition politics was a kind of a rival. So Fred Hampton, the Black Panther Party, was killed because he was leading the Rainbow Coalition, which was a new sort of a leap of the Black Panther Party to understand maybe we should work with the Chicanos, with the Asian, and that kind of coalition politics was kind of the signal at that time for the FBI to go, okay, he needs to go. The same for Martin Luther King, like the way he sort of let go of the liberal politics and involved anti-war politics and anti-capitalist politics also. The same for Martin Luther King when he, Malcolm X, when he turned his back on the Nation of Islam, which was quite nationalist, chauvinist, sexist, and whatever, and had also a kind of more socialist approach, like an understanding, like maybe black and white need to work. These people were one after the other assassinated. So it is actually the most difficult form of politics, but I think it still is the most beautiful form of solidarity politics. So I think this coalition politics is also is not just the most transgressive, because coalition politics, in my experience, I've been involved in activism throughout, I mean, in anti-racism in Holland and anti-war, pro-Palestine activism. Those often were overlapping groups and movements. And what I learned was it is the bringing together of groups that allows groups to learn from each other. There is no other pedagogy that can do that. There is no school, there's nothing that can expose you to other subjective histories, but also other demands, like people making jokes about, for instance, gay people, would be corrected by comrades saying, I don't like that because I'm actually also in this LGBT group. And then the fact that you have been together in that movement, you've been beaten up together by the police, it creates a kind of affinity and a kind of comradeship that make you want to defend the other's cause in ways that nothing else can do, let alone no Islamophobe type of project from the state that tells you have to be, you know, like you have to be this or you have to be that. So I think it's also transgressive. It's also a form of, it's very Gramscian. It's like people coming together creates things that you cannot imagine. But it's also mathematical. It's mathematical. We know on our own, as separate groups, we will never win. It's just a mathematical truth. We will never separately win and gain any radical change, but maybe, just maybe, there's no guarantee, just maybe we will if we join forces. And so lastly, I wanted to say this is also important because in my learning from people like Gloria Wekker and Philomena Essed in the Netherlands who've been involved in the 70s, 80s, 90s, I think coalition politics and solidarities that are also intergenerational are crucial. Often our spaces are, I think this is a nice space, where this is an intergenerational space. I wish activism was like that as well. Activism tends to be solo generational, not intergenerational. So I think the idea of also intergenerationality is crucial, not just because you need to have the lessons of different experiences, but also we don't make the history. It's the history is written by the powerful, and we try to make history, we archive, we whatever. So a lot of things are missed. And I mentioned Martin Luther King. If you see what happened with Martin Luther King, the history of Martin Luther King, it's an abomination. I mean, it has been taken over by the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the whole Martin Luther King Center has become one freak show of, I don't know, like it's horrible. Like it doesn't have any reference to the radical politics of Martin Luther King. And that's why people kind of like snobbishly like, oh, Martin Luther King is not as cool as Malcolm X. Actually, that's not true. It's just that history has been erased, and people from those histories that are part of your movement. So we've, for instance, invited people that were active in the Black Panther Party and the Last Poets and other artists who came and would talk to our people and our youths about don't trust this, don't believe in that. And I think that's also why intergenerationality is important. And I think that's also important because we see history repeating itself also in some of the discussions we're having about, you know, what is the state, should we trust the state, who should we work with or not. Sometimes people can come and tell you, oh no, don't go for that, so I'm gonna save you a lot of time, and then just tell you in the conclusion what they're really about. So I think that's also why intergenerationality is important, and also because it's good for me. I'm becoming middle-aged, so...
Thank you, Miriyam. Really. Yeah, because of course intergenerational work around cloud also touches on different experiences with devices and networks that can sometimes be helpful and sometimes be in the way. And before I come back to you to try and think about what a coalition politics would be that includes cloud resistance, are there any questions or comments from the room? Maybe you then can also have some time to think about it, and then we can come back to it. I'm sure there are. It's just a bit uncomfortable for me to see you, but yeah, you're there. The word has been said. Abolition as a sort of reference of the type of work that counter-cloud strategies might learn from or look at. Does any of you want to respond to this use of this word, and if it's helpful or useful or actually not at all? Maybe Miriyam.
Yeah, I also had a question for Miriyam, but I can postpone that till later. I think it's a good. It gives directionality to the cause, because otherwise there's nothing to work towards, or at least there might be too many things to work towards in this. Maybe it's a kind of form of working through a coalition. Although this was my question to you really about that, because I found it quite jarring, but maybe in a good way. Yeah, I think abolition might be something to combine people, but yeah, I think the main, maybe what you were maybe hinting towards, or what is this idea of epistemic friction within groups, because often when we talk about sort of coalitions or when we talk about solidarities, it's assuming flattening those epistemic frictions and not allowing the conflict to arise within that. So I was wondering whether the idea of a coalition keeps that, or is it very instrumental? And that's, you know, you're kind of cautious of it sounding liberal, and maybe that's the liberal part, is it sounds instrumental, which is obviously needed, because that's you know, there is a goal. Abolition, let's say, can be the goal. But yeah, is there different forms of instrumentality where one, you say, let's leave our differences aside and try to get there, and where the other one, where it's actually, let's have a lot of arguments as we get there, and maybe that's the yeah, something. This is not even looking like a question anymore, but it's an important one.
But I leave it to the moderator.
Yes.
Whether I can.
Will you please answer this, Miriyam?
Yeah, I think that's an important conversation, and I think the short answer is I don't know, because it's very context depending. There are certain coalitions where you really have to have a code of conduct. You really have to have an agreement not to discuss certain things, because it would just mean immediate fracture. And you have other coalitions where you can let things go, and but I think the fundamental element of coalition politics is the bringing together of different groups. That's the point about coalitions. And to not silo, this is what neoliberalism has done. It was a top-down project, at least in Western Europe, in the 90s, as the economic crisis really hit, the radicalization that was still lingering from the 60s and 70s had to be limited. And one way to do it was to separate groups. So state funding was redesigned in a way that everybody was separated in groups, to the extent that also immigrants, so it went really in detail, to the extent that we were separated from the Turks and from the Surinamese. And like even as immigrants, we were not even one group to do coalition, let alone coalition with other causes. Like even within just anti-racism, that had to be split and split and split. And so I think it's because they also know the numbers, the mathematics, and there is something very transgressive about people coming together. And I think so my answer would be, it's depending on the context. There are some contexts where it's difficult, where you have really liberal, strange, sometimes politics in the climate change, climate politics, where I think like, you think that that's kind of, never mind, I won't say it here. But I mean, where I just, no, I mean, it's like, I mean, this discussion about we need fewer people on the planet and what this means, the ethics and moral of it, and the kind of like, it's almost like, you know, green fascism, but they're not always fascist. Like they're actually well-meaning, sometimes quite young people. And I'm also like allow young people to make mistakes, to process things and to develop. And then I'm also like, you can't put this as a condition from day one on this group, because then you will never have, you know. So that's why I'm saying it's context depending. But overall, what I've seen, it is very powerful because it allows people to first develop loyalties, like alliances. Oh, you took this baton for me, next time I will take it for you. And then I will also hear a bit closer what you were saying about whatever, your sexuality or your ethnic, whatever, like minority within the Muslim majority community, or that is a give and take. And that comes by struggling together. It's very idealistic, but I think every time we see examples across the world, which is why we need to be international. If we only look at our own environment, maybe we won't see examples. That's why internationalism is very liberating. I see stuff now in Chile that I'm like, okay, we need to copy paste some of that. You know, like that's very empowering in terms of coalition politics. But we can have a discussion.
Thank you. You want to, because I think in the practice of Aouragh, in the everyday, this resistance to flattening is very active, no?
Oh, yeah, that's what you said, flattening. Yeah, maybe we have actually too much complexity, in fact. Sometimes it gets very overwhelming. No, I think like to stay also with this idea of patchwork, and there is one reference that was very important in formulating some of the thoughts that I'm trying to find now, which is not in my notes. I'm sorry, but in any case. We were referencing it in a digital discomfort thread, but to think about the seams not as boundaries per se, but rather resources that can be used in order to create connections between different scales, and maybe this is a form of resisting flattening, and that connecting these seams or bringing that forward. Yeah.
But can we maybe like scale back to the sneaky moments that we all live, from Maria reading the story from her smartphone to what we've seen happening in what was called the Arab Spring, where people were jumping on Facebook to try and circulate messages that needed to go out in the world. We see every day how we actually flatten in order to get stuff done. How do you practice with that? What do you do in those situations? And
feel guilty.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
Do you have a concrete thing you can think of where this might have occurred?
I know for sure in the daily life of Varia, there's lots of those moments. Maybe you can tell us a story.
No, I mean like building on this idea of guilt, which I think we do try to stay away from in our in also in the way that we relate each other and to our technologies, because it's not really possible, even if we do try as an organization to stay away from certain big tech tools in our personal lives. Like we still need to talk to our families. We still need to. A lot of us are actually, so we are based in Rotterdam, but a lot of us are not from the Netherlands. And so we want to keep in touch with what is going on. And sometimes, for example, Facebook is the only place where this information is circulating. So we also cannot really remove ourselves from that without entering a form of isolation. So there is that complexity there that stays with us also, and like what we bring into these conversations when we have them, and the inability to really separate one from the other.
I think guilt is a symptom of reflection, isn't it? So, you know, if you think about anything deeply, especially in the context of big tech and clouds, inevitably, whenever you end up having to use them, you question that and you think about it in the same way you've always been thinking about it. So it manifests as a kind of guilt. I mean, maybe that's the problem. Maybe that's what we need to try and figure out how not to, in order to sustain the counter cloud stuff. I don't know. I mean, you're saying you kind of move away and keep that sort of compartmentalized somewhere, and that allows you to continue doing what you're doing without, you know, pulling and.
But guilt is also like something you do individually, no?
Yeah.
And I think that's what we've seen in trying to think about a strike, thinking about cloud resistance, that when we fall into the trap of taking it personally, like holding this as an individual, then we won't get there. So it's really important to try and think about it in relation to how we are with others.
And the other way around.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean?
I mean, also in the stuff around the Middle East, what was really helpful was to deconstruct temporarily, like what phase of struggle are you talking about? That determines, in a way, what produces guilt and what doesn't. So I had this, mega grandiose idea of making a matrix of resistance, and so what I did was I thought about, like, specifically in Syria, but also in Morocco later, the online and the offline as separate entities, although they interact. But according to the three different phases, when you think about revolutions, so you could think about strike, you could think about protest, the pre, the during, the after. And what it shows was the pre has different relations to questions about what to involve with, because it really is about reaching out. You cannot be moralistic when you think about reaching out. You cannot apply certain moralistic conditions when it's about reaching to the masses, whatever, the people who, who have Facebook, who have the journalists who of New York Times, who have Twitter, who then retweet what revolutionaries say. The during, that is also very different, because then it's kind of non-technology becomes really important. You need to be in the street. You really need to also distribute flyers. You need to really also do the Hyde Park corner stuff, like stand on a box and really talk to people, be in the mosque, be in the hammam, be like in these physical spaces. And the after really depends on the aftermath. Is it revolutionary or counter-revolutionary? And so in a lot of cases, unfortunately, it was counter-revolutionary. And in the aftermath, it really was very anti sort of mainstream tech, because they became the tools of surveillance for the state. So it was a preservation thing to not actually engage with these commercial tools. But also it became very tech, as in a lot of digital archiving started to begin. people were so hungry and they wanted to archive, document what is happening, and we need to show this. And even if it was naive, as in, I don't know if it was naive, but even if it was from the motivation, for instance, we need to archive this YouTube stuff, these videos, because one day maybe Bashar al-Assad will be trialed, and then we have the evidence. So this whole debate about memory, evidence, and archiving, which is very technological. So for me, that was very helpful to say, okay, are we mobilizing for the strike? Are we doing the strike itself on the day, or are we thinking about after the strike? And that could still be geared towards abolition. That can be geared towards reform or towards revolution, as one very important historical figure that was killed in Berlin said. Reform or revolution, socialism or barbarism. I mean, those debates from Rosa Luxemburg till now are still the same. That's what abolition, why it scares people. Like, can we just change it a little bit rather than abolish it? It scares. It is the same dilemma as reform or revolution. It's really like there's no guarantees, right? But yeah, that would be my reflection from at least from the Middle East, from the experiences of the people there.
Right. I want to. I don't want to put people on the spot, but I think it would be interesting to hear some of the concrete plans that people have for what they want to do on the 8th of March. I'm wondering, Donna, would you want to say some words? And I know there's some other agents, like maybe Manita, or here. Sorry, I really can't.
I have a question, but it's not going to be necessarily about the 8th of March.
Okay.
But it's related to really the strategies of evading the cloud.
Yeah.
And I feel that's like so urgent, because if we don't have practices and behavioral change, then our movements can be very easily sabotaged by the way they're being surveilled or infiltrated or whatever. And so I'm wondering, maybe it's a good place to discuss how important it is to have places like the Hack Labs or the tech centers or the maker places to teach people the skills when they need to be encrypted, the crypto parties and things like that, so that, we can upgrade our own levels of how we use the tech that we do decide to use, and to learn more about, like, do not put that onto a Facebook invite kind of thing, and those sorts of practices. And then one aspect of that I've been trying to address for many years is that to evade this having the pocket mobile surveillance device everywhere you go, why are not Hack Labs kind of picking up on this and realizing that it would be better to create these centers as a go-to place, like a library, to use certain tech that you don't need to carry it around with you 24/7, because we're just participating in that panopticon that they have so well constructed around us. So if you have comments on any of that.
Thank you very much for that. So yeah, this is about the question, like, how to draw the Hack Labs, the people with technical knowledge, into the coalition. I just want to say something that you haven't heard us use the word surveillance, and this is on purpose. It's strategic because we think we have somehow got a bit lost in thinking that this was about data extraction and surveillance only. It's definitely part of the story we're telling, but it's not all of it. Because what we're actually seeing, and interestingly, Big Tech Cloud is actually a very strong candidate in protecting you exactly from that. I mean, you've heard this, Apple and Google make big claims and often being very successful in exactly guaranteeing security according to certain standards, of course, that small collectives have a hard time to keep up. So we have to be careful to flatten the discussion about counter-cloud action into surveillance. It's not to say it's not important, but I just want to be very clear why we have on purpose not used that word and not used that rhetoric. So not to say that it is super important, and I think that's what we're all hinting at, in finding ways that the tech communities can be in conversation and can be places to go to for different collectives. I don't know who you want to say something about how Varia, for example, connects with Housing Strike or with different groups in the neighborhood.
Yeah. Yes. I was also thinking about how transfeminist servers and communities define the idea of safety, which is not necessarily only technological, but rather comes back to the social, developing collective forms of resistance that blend the social with the technical sometimes, and also the example of Mastodon, which in and of itself is of this federated social media. Not secure from an encrypted point of view, but still the security moves towards having trust in your system administrator, which you may or may not have. You might not, you shouldn't perhaps, I don't know. But it changes the conversation around social trust rather than technological trust. And I think that's also an interesting perspective to bring into that conversation. About the housing group, they are great. No, within the space that so actually it happened during the pandemic that we were not using the space a lot. We were not able to host events. And we also came up with our own mutual agreements of not sharing the space with more than 5 people and so on, things like this to protect each other. But because the space was mostly empty, we decided to also share with other organizations or groups, such as Cultural Workers Unite, which is a group of cultural workers that are trying to organize for better working conditions, or the BPV, Bond Precaire Woonvormen, which is a housing rights group that meets every Tuesday, and they provide the non-technological space, actually, because they, for example, they do have a mailing list, but their form of meeting is just to be there every Tuesday at a particular time, and so people will end up becoming familiar with them. In terms of, I do see that all of these struggles interconnect. Yes.
Yes. Right. Some plans for the 8th of March. Do you? Will I be not knocking over water?
Hello. So we did talk about, actually, because we want to kind of come off using Google for our arts organisation and just cleanse our digital kind of infrastructure. And we were thinking about actually building our own server, but actually when we thought about it, people, even going back to basics as to kind of what does a cloud mean? And it's like it's been so, the cloud word wasn't what it was now, kind of this fluffy white or like kind of, weather. There's different connotations within what that's supposed to be. So we thought, in the context of where we are in Scotland, in a very poor city, we've taken over an old indoor shopping market, very interesting people that use that space. We thought we'd just go back to the basics and have a kind of discussion about what the cloud is, and kind of actually de-cloudify it, or kind of get rid of the fog and kind of talk about the actual technical, and trying to understand that, because like we're talking very elitist, privileged language in the room, and it's kind of, some people in our city, don't have phones, don't have internet, don't have access to these things. So it was kind of go back to some of the basics, I think.
Some other cloud strike plans? I was wondering.
Yeah. So one of the things we're thinking about, we're not sure yet what exactly will happen on the 8th of March in Varia, but we're thinking we're struggling also to speak to different contexts. Like we have a very direct context of the neighborhood and the city that we want to address, and we're thinking of how to do that. Indeed, like similar to what Donna just described, in indeed removing some fog or transforming the fog into something else. And at the same time, would I also really like to show the joy of working through technology and experimenting with it and creating different outcomes, visuals, while also celebrating doing your own infrastructure. So we're thinking about a server party, which we still don't really know what that could be concretely, but somehow we're trying to combine these different contexts that we are surrounded with.
You want to say something about plans for Barcelona?
Well, yeah, maybe just a brief comment about that specific context. I think the long tail of feminist strikes somehow has a specific a legacy there. I mean, the strike, what's understood as feminist strikes, like especially in the how it intensified in the last years, is a combination of labor strike, care strike, student strike, and consumption strike, and that is a bunch of open-ended questions, like what does it mean to organize around something that could be called a care strike. Of course, that is like specifically related to a branch of feminisms. What does it mean to stop? And it produces very specific political subjects and subjectivities, right? So then I just wanted to circulate this question somehow, like to circulate those vectors of strike specifically for the 8th of March, and as open-ended questions in relation to the cloud regime. So what does it? Cristina already posed it. No, like how is the distribution of service? If we read or practiced, if we understand it as care practices, right? And how is a care strike then taking place there? What is consumption strike if it's on this client-server distribution of almost like identities, right? So this all those vectors of action concretely in the 8th of March, I think, have a legacy. I don't think it's so interesting to actually invent it from scratch, but also at the same time problematize like almost like the dead ends that these kind of inventions towards the strike in relation to care and to students and to consumption and to labor have already happened. So yeah, that was one point that I wanted to bring in relation to that particular context, and the other has to do with this thing of guilt or victimhood that somehow already appeared already. I think there is something on the baseline of the understanding of that regime, which is actually which parts of the economy of the cloud can be understood through the categories of analysis of modern project, like again like the emergent subjectivities of that regime and so on, and which others actually cannot apprehend the complexity of the cloud regime and hence need like a different thing. Like for example, all the identity politics in relation to the cloud regime, like this production, like constant production and reproduction of oneness, no, in this identity system. I don't think it applies to the cloud regime at all. Actually, that oneness is both like reproduced and depleted. So and in that sense, I was like really moved by your intervention, Miriyam, because I think that difficult part of doing a coalition actually takes a different like level in this like depletion of oneness, while actually reproduction of identity politics, no, like and the like isolation of those positionalities or political subjectivities. So yeah, one is more like situated in the Catalan, Spanish or Spanish-speaking struggles, and the other is more like in relation to the guilt and victimhood thing.
Thank you. Maria, would you want to respond to this, or?
I don't think so. I mean, maybe I would just need a little bit of clarification in terms of how does the guilt manifest in one or the other, or does it manifest in one and not the other? So if I understand it correctly, it's manifesting in the kind of identity oneness creation as guilt, but in other words, it doesn't. And
sorry, just I connected it because when you said guilt, Femke said, but this is very individual.
Yes. That's the I just wanted to. I mean, I guess I agree. I would like to know how to understand a little bit more, maybe how the bringing together or the understanding of the struggle. I mean, I guess if you understand the struggle, not as it's not your fault, I guess, because you're not the one, the singular one. But there is, I guess, in some sense, something like a collective guilt. No, there's you can have that, and you know, I don't know. I don't know how to. I guess it's just sort of trying to understand the world not in its purity, and perhaps understanding that the struggle or the desire for abolition is the point, and so therefore, you know, however you can do this in its sort of imperfect versions is okay. So yes, but I don't know. I don't know if this is really an answer or just me having an internal monologue with myself to relieve myself of guilt. Yeah.
I see your face, Miriyam. You have some thoughts about fault.
I mean, I think it's a very interesting discussion because just to take it to another level or another conversation, I think this is part of discussions about hegemony. What is hegemony? Hegemony is also what are the dominant ideas? What are the dominant ideas in the politics of emotion? And I think guilt is a very productive domain of affect for hegemony. And so we are constantly geared into thinking in a certain way that is subjectified, individualized, guilt. It could also be productive in a radical way, but then I would not call it guilt. But I think guilt is paralyzing rather than activating. And I think, so this hegemonic idea is very important to look at because it's a product of capitalism, and capitalism is very hybrid. So capitalism is racialized, is class, is gendered, is so that's why there's all these jokes about white privilege, white men. They have different types of guilt. They have much less guilt when it comes to a lot of things, you know? So it's this guilt is not equally distributed either. So it's very gendered. So there's this whole debate about like the politics of affect and emotion that is very gendered, and women tend to also feel in a certain way. And then, of course, we have like racialized women and I don't know what. So I would say, I think what I find most productive about a discussion of guilt, in for instance, the literature in anthropology, they connect it to shame. Like the processes of shaming, like guilt tripping and shaming. You see this also a lot, unfortunately, in political movements. Guilt tripping someone into silence. Shut up, you're white. Shut up, you're not disabled. Shut up, you're like, it's a shortcut too, you know. But I think what I found interesting is examples where radical movements or protests have reversed it, where they reversed it and they shame the state, or they accuse as guilty the oppressor, or I think that's a productive way of thinking guilt, where you shame it, where you, I mean, all these slogans in protest movement, shame on you, this is what, or I mean, I'm not good at, you're a better performer than me, but I mean, I think that's maybe reversing the gaze of guilt. That might be productive.
Right. Thank you. I see many questions, but I see also a clock that's ticking. I know there's many questions, and we're going to go to the bar and have many more conversations, because we know this is a discussion that we can only scratch the surface of. So we thought, what better way to end than with the second part of a story?
Tuesday, 9:50 a.m. The hospital room was quiet and dark. The only light coming through the window was the faint light of the moon. I had been admitted to the hospital only a few hours ago, and already I was feeling weak and fatigued. I had contracted an illness transmitted through cloud computing. The doctors had warned me that the infection was serious and that I would undergo a number of tests. I had no desire to listen to the radio, nor was I able to find the energy to get bored. I was too busy leafing through the papers, trying to make sense of what was happening to me. The tests revealed that the infection had caused me to experience the gender of the person I was fucking last week. It made me feel like the concept of my body and my gender was changing, flickering between known and unknown. This made me feel both scared and confused. The tests were painful. They picked a very large needle and inserted it into my body in the wrong spot, causing me to writhe in pain. I tried to find a way to cope. Thursday, 12:32 p.m. It had been a week since my diagnosis. I had no idea how I had contracted it, but I suspected it was from the cloud infrastructure I was exposed to. I was put on an IV drip, and the days began to blur together. I felt incredibly weak and fatigued, and still had no desire to listen to the radio or read the papers. I was in too much pain to even move around. Saturday, 11 a.m. A software service platform was reportedly infected, which allowed it to enter my system. The drips and tubes connected to my arms weren't very pleasant either. The incessant noise of the pump was enough to drive me mad. I was so weak, I had trouble even picking up my pen to jot down the phrases that had been swimming in my head. I knew that if I didn't get them down quickly, they would haunt me until the next morning. The disease was trying to spread and scale up and down my body with no upfront costs. I felt helpless as the infection wormed its way through my veins, and I helplessly watched as it consumed me, bit by bit. Monday, 10 a.m. The agony of it all hit me with force. Even opening a pack of instant crisps had become almost impossible, as the consequences of my awkwardness, my new weakness, and the catheter in my vein. Even worse, I couldn't get a toenail clip onto my toes, which had been infected. And then there was the drip noise, torturing my ears. The people in the side rooms were A/B testing their corneas. Which one is more effective? The virtualization made the infection grow more and more powerful, claiming its place faster and harder, and with little management or maintenance. My body already felt like it was in agony, but the agony had only just begun. Wednesday, 8 a.m. I found myself sleeping for long hours, only waking up for blood tests upon blood test. Nothing bothered me anymore except the eye injections. The doctors woke me up last night to remove the tube in my throat, and that kept me in a coughing fit for hours. I can't speak yet. At 5 a.m., 5 tubes of blood were taken. The 7 a.m. nurse seems nice. Thursday, 2 a.m. I awoke up with a start, my throat tight and my eyes blurry. I was still in the hospital bed, the beeping of machines and voices in the hallways all around me. I felt a strange kind of detachment, as if I was no longer connected to my body. I could feel the needles going in and out of my veins. It doesn't bother me. It wants to outsource my aging organs to avoid paying pensions. Thursday, 11 p.m. They are the poor women who stick together, governed by the minority of men. I began to feel as if something was moving inside my agile sprints. Inside me in agile sprints without me even knowing, following an interconnective intuition deep within. My limbs moved erratically, following a risk-related procedure to minimize negative and maximize positive possibilities. My gender felt like it was shifting, just slightly. Friday, 10 a.m. Am I in hospital for observation, or have I been put in a position to observe, to lay there, stare, and observe? It has been a strange few days. Last night, a woman was arguing with the ambulance emergency unit, something about an attempted suicide. I'm still not sure what happened. General strike in the hospital. EastEnders theme tune playing from the neighboring bed. I want a cup of tea, but the wires attached get in the way. Somebody wails from across the hall. I have felt my body change its concept, its gender, and even during the act of sleeping. I'm not sure what is happening to me, and the doctors don't even have the answers either.
On behalf of Transmediale, I wanted to thank Femke, Cristina, Miriyam, and also I wanted to thank Neon for coming to us with this proposal for this conversation and the meeting that will ensue. So thank you all very much. And let me just remind you that the program will continue tomorrow.